Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Former US State Secretary Hillary Clinton denies any personal connection to Jeffrey Epstein during her congressional testimony. The US and Iran described their Geneva talks as positive but without a breakthrough, with more negotiations planned next week. And Pakistan launches fresh strikes on Taliban targets in Kabul after cross-border attacks. Former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has told a congressional committee investigating the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein that she had never met him and had no information about his criminal activities. Her husband, former President Bill Clinton, is set to testify later today.
Behind closed doors, the former First Lady of the United States, Hillary Clinton, met with lawmakers in New York over her links with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein on Thursday. She said she had no information to share about his criminal activities.
Well, I have just finished testifying. I answered every one of their questions as fully as I could, based on what I knew, and what I knew is what I said in my statement this morning. I never met Jeffrey Epstein, never had any connection or communication with him. I knew Ghislaine Maxwell casually as an acquaintance, but whatever they asked me, I did my very best to respond. I don't know how many times I had to say I did not know Jeffrey Epstein. I never went to his island. I never went to his homes. I never went to his offices. So it's on the record numerous times.
The deposition had to be paused briefly when a leaked photo of Clinton appeared online by Republican Senator Lauren Boebert. Boebert says she does not recall sending the photo.
Why you sent that picture? I just returned to my hotel room and installed the BleachBit software and took a camera to my iPad. So I guess in regards to any photos, I do not recall.
House Oversight Chairman James Comer said the deposition went well.
And I think that this was a productive deposition today. I think we learned a lot. There were a lot of questions that we asked that we weren't satisfied with answers that we got, but we will continue to move forward. Any of my colleagues, every member of the committee asked questions. And
former President Bill Clinton is scheduled to testify on Friday. He's denied wrongdoing and expressed regret for his association. Committee Chair James Comer said there are currently no allegations of wrongdoing against the Clintons.
US diplomatic efforts over Iran's nuclear program appear to be moving forward, but rather slowly. Officials from Washington, Tehran and Muscat have signalled progress, but talks in Geneva ended with no sign of a breakthrough, with more negotiations scheduled for next week in Vienna.
Nuclear talks between the United States and Iran in Geneva have been described as positive, according to a US official. The negotiations in Switzerland brought together President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi. Oman has been mediating contacts between the two sides as efforts continue to revive diplomatic engagement over Iran's nuclear program. Although the overall tone was described as constructive, it's reported that the US side had been disappointed with Iran's positions during the morning session. The two sides plan to resume negotiations after consultations in their respective capitals, with technical-level discussions scheduled to take place next week in Vienna. That's according to Omani Foreign Minister Saeed Badr al-Busaidi in a post on X after the talks concluded. We have finished the day after significant progress in the negotiation between the United States and Iran, the Omani Foreign Minister wrote. Earlier, a senior Iranian official told Reuters that the two sides could reach a framework agreement if Washington separates nuclear and non-nuclear issues. Speaking later in the evening, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran and Washington had moved closer to agreement.
We made good progress and very seriously entered into the elements of a possible agreement, both in the nuclear field and in the area of sanctions. On some issues, we have now become very close to an understanding. On certain other issues, we still have differences of opinion. The technical teams will begin technical talks in Vienna on Monday at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And with the assistance of the agency's experts, we will try to bring some of the technical issues into a framework so that it can later be aligned with the political demands of both sides.
He added that a further round of negotiations will be held in less than a week. No joint statement from the United States or Iran was immediately released.
Turning to Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed plans for a possible trilateral meeting in Abu Dhabi. It's after talks between Kyiv and Washington in Geneva about post-war reconstruction.
Talks between Ukrainian and US officials took place in Geneva on Thursday and lasted several hours, focusing on post-war reconstruction and preparations for a possible settlement framework. After the meeting, Ukraine's top negotiator, Rustem Umerov, briefed President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian leader said he had also been in contact with US President Donald Trump and confirmed that preparations are underway for a trilateral meeting expected in early March in Abu Dhabi.
Today, I spoke several times with Rustem Umerov, David Arakhamia, and the American president's representatives, Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner, as they were wrapping up their meetings. There is more readiness for the next trilateral meeting. Most likely the next meeting will be in the Emirates, in Abu Dhabi. We expect the gathering to happen at the beginning of March to finalize everything that was agreed for real security guarantees, to prepare a meeting at the level of country leaders.
The Geneva discussions came despite continued fighting. Hours before the talks began, Zelensky said Russia launched 420 drones and 39 missiles targeting energy and other critical infrastructure across 8 Ukrainian regions. Dozens of people were reported injured. Moscow later said its air defenses shot down 220 Ukrainian drones over a 9-hour period, including several heading towards the Russian capital. Russian officials also reported missile strikes on the border region of Belgorod. The war has now entered its 5th year. Despite US-brokered contacts, Kyiv and Moscow remain far apart on key issues, including territory.
Denmark has decided to call early elections after US President Donald Trump's renewed interest in the Arctic island. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has called the snap elections as she looks to capitalize on rising support and to redefine its relationship with the United States.
Denmark is heading to a parliamentary election on the 24th of March 24 in what is shaping up to be a high-stakes and potentially decisive vote centered on Greenland, global tensions and pressure at home. Danish Prime Minister Frederiksen called the election as her approval ratings climb, fueled by her firm response to renewed interest from US President Donald Trump in annexing Greenland. She has flatly rejected any suggestion of selling the Arctic territory and rallied European allies behind Denmark's sovereignty.
You know what I stand for. Whether I should continue to be your Prime Minister, that depends on how strong a mandate you give the Social Democrats. The parliamentary election will be held on March 24th, 2026, because much suggests that it will be a close election. It will be an important election, yes. It will also be a decisive election because it will be in the coming 4 years that we as Danes and we as Europeans will truly have to stand on our own. We must define our relationship with the United States. We must rearm and secure peace on our continent. We must stick together in Europe, and we must secure the future of the Danish Commonwealth.
The dispute over Greenland has boosted her international standing, building on her COVID-era leadership and support for Ukraine. But at home, many voters are still worried about rising food prices, strained public services and inequality. The election will test whether Danes back her global leadership or punish her government for neglecting domestic issues. Her administration, a rare cross-party coalition formed in 2022 between Frederiksen's Social Democrats, the Liberals led by Defence Minister Troels Lund Poulsen, and the Moderates headed by Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, may struggle to keep its majority as traditional political divides return. With immigration also set to feature heavily, the vote will decide whether Denmark prioritizes stability abroad or greater focus on problems at home.
Columbia University student Almina Agayeva has been released after her detention by US immigration agents. The case sparked protests and raised questions about protections for foreign students on campus.
New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani met U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House on Thursday for talks focused mainly on housing affordability. During the meeting, Mamdani also raised the early morning detention of Almina Agayeva, a student at Columbia University. Mamdani later said the president told him she would be released imminently. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed she had been freed, but said removal proceedings were underway, describing her as being in the country illegally after her visa was allegedly terminated in 2016. Her lawyers say she was wrongly detained, and a federal judge ruled she cannot be deported without a court order. Columbia's acting president, Claire Shipman, said federal agents entered a residential building at around 6:30 in the morning after claiming they were searching for a missing child. Shipman said a public safety officer repeatedly asked for a warrant, which was not produced before the student was taken away.
Let me be clear. Misrepresenting identity and other facts to gain access to a residential building is a breach of protocol. All law enforcement agencies are obligated to follow established legal, ethical standards.
The Department of Homeland Security denies misrepresenting its intentions, saying the building manager and the student's roommate allowed agents inside. The detention sparked protests on campus, with students and union representatives calling for stronger protections for non-citizen students.
We're calling for the university to take appropriate actions regarding their tolerance and treatment of federal law enforcement officials. And we are also calling for them to protect the student body and do more for us as we try to continue our education.
We have to do this because Columbia will not defend its own students and student workers. We have to do this because Columbia will not defend its own students and student workers. We have to keep us safe. We have to keep us safe.
Arrests on campus remain rare, even during the current immigration crackdown. But this case has heightened concern among international students about their safety and legal status.
After the break, we'll unpack the latest round of Geneva talks between Ukraine and US envoys and what the looming EU legal proposal to ban Russian oil could mean for the conflict's next phase. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Ukraine's chief negotiator Rustem Umerov is meeting US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in Geneva amid sustained Russian missile and drone attacks on Kyiv. On a parallel track, the European Union is preparing a legal proposal to permanently ban Russian oil imports just days after Hungary's parliamentary elections. Let's bring in our guest, Mark Merowitz, professor at State University of New York Maritime College from New York, US. Welcome to the program, Mark.
Pleasure.
Now, what are the primary objectives Ukraine has brought to these talks in Geneva, and how do they align with Washington's own strategic priorities?
That's a tricky question because, President Trump, his policy towards Russia is very movable and changeable. And, it's interesting, Zelensky's post that he made about the war in Ukraine is that the aggressor shall not receive a reward, so peace can last. In other words, I don't think everybody's in sync together in what their objectives are. And certainly the United States and Russia are not in sync with Ukraine. And the last point I would make is this shuttle diplomacy that they have, where they move from place to place and the Swiss are there. It's almost similar to what's going on with the Iran negotiations, which is you need to sit down with Trump and Putin and Zelensky and figure this out. This other moving around and shuttling around, it doesn't get anywhere. And to your point about the EU proposal to ban the Russian imports, Hungary has said, Orban has said, he's going to block it. And I think that means that it won't go through. So I think there are a lot of obstacles here to a solution, which is very much needed. Even after the negotiations, as your news report, Russia attacked with drones and destroyed, and you show that very clearly in your news report. So it just goes on and on and on, and years, this is 4 years now since the invasion, and years since the invasion of Crimea, which Zelensky reminds in his recent post. The end of the day has to go to the top, and the top leaders have to sit down and have direct negotiations and work it out. To work it out is complicated because Ukraine doesn't want to give up any land, and Russia wants to take land, even land it doesn't occupy. And the United States wants to propose a Gaza-type rehabilitation plan for Ukraine, which requires 80 billion plus investment. And the problem there is that corporations in the United States are very wary of investing in a war zone and feel that they can't allow, their shareholders won't allow them to do it. So I am sorry to put these obstacles in place, but I think the answer to it is Trump, Putin, and then maybe Trump, Putin, Zelensky, maybe Trump, Putin, Zelensky, and EU, or something like that. But just to have this shuttling around with the Swiss is a road to nowhere, I think.
And Professor Rustem Umerov is a seasoned, experienced negotiator. What leverage does Ukraine need most right now, amongst perhaps weapons funding, sanctions coordination, and how receptive are US envoys?
Look, I mean, Michael McFaul, who was our envoy, is a strong supporter of Ukraine. Many Americans believe the United States should continue supporting Ukraine. The problem here is that all politics is local, which means that President Trump is facing the midterm elections for the Congress in 2026. And this is what is on his mind. He wants the Republicans to win both houses, and that's what he's thinking about. And a lot of what he's planning is not having additional wars and conflicts in Europe, Iran, and otherwise, which might upend or interfere with continuing to control the House and the Senate. And I think that's a lot of what's going on here. That's why maybe it's being delayed and delayed and delayed. But the problem is, at the end of the day, it's Ukrainian people who are suffering and even attacking after you have a negotiation meeting. Does that tell something about the intentions of the Russians? I mean, it tells you loud and clear that as much as you can sit down with envoys and discussions, it doesn't work. So at the end of the day, McFaul's point is the United States and the Europeans need to support Ukraine so that they can wage a war and bring this to a conclusion. If you don't do that, then you end up with a recipe for either continued postponement and disaster. And that's what we're ending up here. Years and years are going by here. And again, to the envoys, I say kudos and thank you for doing this. It's very important. But at the end of the day, we say Truman's expression, the buck stops here, that's President Trump. Has to step up to the plate and with Putin and make this happen. And that I just don't know how that happens. I'm not so sure I know the answer to it.
Professor, as you've underscored, the ongoing Russian attacks haven't stopped, and it underscores continued battlefield pressure on Kyiv. How much do current military dynamics influence Ukraine's negotiating posture?
Well, I'm not an expert on the military strategy. It's very clear that, the end result in terms of military strategy is supplying Ukraine with the top level military assets to be able to wage the war. But again, as your report shows, the damage and destruction and loss of life in Ukraine is just astronomical. And and I also would add, which is I think where the Europeans are thinking, is that this is really the buffer zone and the buffer to Russia wanting to go further in Europe and to continue to invade other countries in Europe. And so I think that the United States and Europe need to do something about it. But again, the lose factor, let's say the unknown factor is again Putin. And again, we're faced with today malevolent and evil leaders in Iran, in Russia, and and then they have facilitators. For example, the Hungarians are facilitators in a sense, and since Orban takes the position that he's opposed to Ukraine and Ukraine is against him, and it's just a bitter fight in a sandbox, and the people who suffer are the people in the country of Ukraine. So about the military strategy, the only strategy is, I think, McFaul's strategy, which is to continue to supply Ukraine with top-level weaponry and try to up their game against Russia. But Russia has the advantage. It has the advantage in soldiers, in troops, in military equipment, and the endless desire. This war, obviously, on the other side is not there. It's a fight for survival. So I think, as I said it before, and I don't think there's any solution to this other than rapidly getting the leadership, Trump, Putin, on the same table, on the same page, and to do that. But again, as I said, and not to be repetitive, the midterm elections are looming very large in Trump's thinking, and it does definitely motivate everything that he does right now. So he may want to delay that result until after the midterms, rather than, getting a peace treaty would be great. But is there a chance we have a peace treaty between now and the November elections? I don't think so. So have some negotiations, have the Swiss go back and forth, go here, go there, meet here, meet there. And then you really leave and everybody has an upbeat, oh yes. And then the EU and Europe are divided internally. So I would say right now in the chess game, we're right now two pawns sitting next to each other and they can't move.
And Professor, could an EU legal ban on Russian oil, effectively cutting one of Moscow's chief revenue streams, shift Russia's willingness to negotiate or harden its stance?
Well, yeah, I guess suppose it would be, there are sanctions. We know that sanctions are helpful, but in the case of the United States, Iranian sanctions, or even the sanctions here, sanctions don't do the trick. And also, as I mentioned before, Hungary is going to block it, as they have before. So if they are able legally, you asked about legally, to block it, I didn't have a chance to look at the EU rules, but sounds like it's similar to NATO, and maybe you need unanimous consent. And if you do, then that is not a road that you can go down. It sounds like a very worth road. On the other hand, even if you place sanctions on Russia or Iran or Venezuela, they're always going to try to go around those sanctions. The ghost fleets and the ships and they're shipping oil, and they're going to do end runs around your sanctions. So that doesn't seem to me, as again, all roads lead to Moscow and Washington. But the EU, I think it's important that the Europeans are considering an action like this. That is important. But again, they're not unified. And with Hungary and Slovakia opposing it, how does that work? At the end of the day, maybe the solution is to, bring Ukraine into NATO. This is something that Russia would be very fearful of. And that is exactly, look, Ukraine made a deal with the United States and Russia to get guarantees, and they gave up their nuclear weapons, if you recall. Mm-hmm. And they regret that. I'm not saying they should have a nuclear war, but I'm saying that had Ukraine had nuclear weapons, they would not be in this situation. Now they're in a situation where they're at the mercy of Russian power, and they're regretting what they agreed to years ago to take guarantees. So if I were Ukraine, I would be very, very wary of what is being offered to me by the Russians. I would be wary. How would I know that? And taking the guarantee of the United States would be very, very important. So what's the extent of the guarantee? And the reconstruction. They're talking about that, and that's very important. I agree. But at the same time, as I said before, you can have reconstruction, but somebody's got to fund it. Is it going to be the American government with its deficit? Or is it going to be private corporations and a peace board? A peace board like you have in Gaza, where people are investing money? The question is then, you're investing in Ukraine, where you have Russia and a war zone and a problem like that, and the rehabilitation of Ukraine when you could still have an ongoing war? How does that fly? And BlackRock's chairman was talking about this. I saw in the Wall Street Journal where he said, well, I'm not so sure that, investors in America are going to want to invest in a war-torn land like this. It's sad to hear this, sad to say. At the end of the day, it's the United States backstop and guarantee that makes the difference. Okay. Whether it has strength and whether or not Trump is in office to enforce it. He's only in office for a very short time. So we got it. Time is of the essence, as we say in the law.
Okay, Professor, we're a little short on time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your analysis.
Tremendous pleasure. Thank you very, very much for having me.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Pakistani jets bombed Kabul, Kandahar and Paktia in Afghanistan in the early hours of Friday morning. Islamabad said the airstrikes were in retaliation for attacks along their adjoining border.
Pakistan says it's in open war with its neighbour Afghanistan. That's according to Pakistani Defence Minister Khawaja Mohammad Asif in a post on X on Friday. He declared that Islamabad's patience had run out as tensions escalated overnight, with both sides reporting heavy losses. Airstrikes were launched on several cities in Afghanistan in the early hours of Friday morning, including Kabul, Kandahar and Paktia. Officials said they were targeting Taliban posts, headquarters and ammunition depots. Islamabad accuses Kabul of harbouring Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan militants, a charge the Taliban-led government denies. The latest escalation comes after the Taliban launched retaliatory attacks on Pakistani border posts on Thursday. Speaking on Pakistan TV, Islamabad's information minister, Ataullah Tarar, said nothing justified the Afghan attacks.
That the Afghan Taliban regime has been harboring terrorists, they have been protecting these terrorists, and by this unprovoked aggression earlier tonight, they have shown to the world that they are just there to protect these terrorists and promote them. Otherwise, there was no justification for this unprovoked aggression across the border tonight.
Afghanistan's Taliban government said the attacks it carried out on Thursday were launched in response to strikes by Pakistan earlier this week, which killed 18 people. Taliban spokesperson Wahidullah Mohammadi said the retaliatory operation focused on Nangarhar and Kunar provinces.
Dear compatriots, in response to the recent airstrikes carried out by Pakistani forces in Nangarhar and Paktia, heavy attacks have begun tonight at 8 p.m. in Nangarhar and Kunar provinces. Keep us in your prayers.
The fighting this week marks the most serious escalation between the neighbours in months and threatens a ceasefire along the two countries' 2,600-kilometre border.
Armenia's Defence Minister Suren Papikyan visited Tehran this week, holding high-level talks with Iranian officials on regional security and cooperation. The talks highlighted Tehran's commitment to closer ties and regional security with Yerevan.
Armenia's Defence Minister Suren Papikyan visited Tehran this week, holding meetings with top Iranian officials. In a meeting with Iranian Defence Minister General Aziz Nasirzadeh, discussions about regional communications drew attention. Nasirzadeh reiterated Iran's position to the Zangezur corridor. Indirectly referring to the TRIP corridor initiative, Nasirzadeh highlighted the importance of protecting the territorial integrity of countries in the region and stated that official Tehran is against interference by trans-regional powers in regional processes. Armenian Defence Minister Suren Papikyan also held a meeting with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. Pezeshkian stated that Tehran is determined to finalise the preparation of the Comprehensive Strategic Cooperation document with Yerevan. He also noted that strengthening cooperation with Armenia in economic and corridor projects is a key priority for officials. The meetings also addressed regional security challenges, including US-Iran tensions, with both sides emphasising the importance of diplomacy and dialogue. Iran's Chief of Staff, General Syed Abdorrahman Mousavi, reiterated Tehran's readiness to expand military cooperation with Armenia and welcomed the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Georgia's European trajectory is under renewed pressure after Brussels warned that visa-free travel to the EU could be suspended for its citizens. A news correspondent reports from Tbilisi.
The European Commission has confirmed that it has already partially suspended visa facilitation for Georgian diplomatic and service passport holders. In a letter to the Georgian opposition dated February 25, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen outlined deep concerns over what the EU describes as systemic and deliberate regression in governance, rule of law, anti-corruption efforts, and visa compliance. Under the EU's visa suspension mechanism, this is only the first phase. If Georgian authorities fail to address the identified shortcomings, the second phase could extend visa requirements to all Georgian citizens, effectively suspending the visa-free regime granted in 2017. The Commission has also called for the release of journalists, activists, and individuals it considers unjustly detained. At the same time, EU member states are discussing possible sanctions against those viewed as responsible for democratic backsliding. No unanimous decision has been reached yet, but negotiations are ongoing. The Georgian government rejects claims of democratic regression and maintains that it remains committed to its European integration path. Still, the stakes are concrete. Visa-free travel to the Schengen area has allowed millions of Georgians to travel for tourism, study, and business without bureaucratic barriers. If the suspension expands, the impact will not be symbolic. It will be felt at airports, consulates, and border crossings. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Azerbaijan and Ethiopia signed agreements on defence cooperation and coordination on the upcoming COP32 climate conference. The documents were signed on Friday in Baku by Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov and Ethiopia's Foreign Minister Gedeon Timotheos in the presence of President Ilham Aliyev and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The agreements include a defence cooperation deal and a memorandum on joint work with the framework of the 32nd United Nations Climate Conference. A new Khojaly Genocide Memorial has been inaugurated in Azerbaijan, honouring the victims of the 1992 tragedy, while the town undergoes extensive reconstruction. Now, our correspondent Gulchin Khojalieva is on the ground with more from Khojaly.
The newly inaugurated Khojaly Genocide Memorial now stands at the heart of Khojaly, serving as a permanent tribute to the victims of the 1992 tragedy that claimed hundreds of civilian lives and left a lasting mark on the nation's memory. The memorial was opened on Thursday with the participation of Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and First Lady Mehriban Aliyeva. Established under a presidential order signed in 2025, the complex is dedicated to preserving the memory of the victims and conveying historical truths to future generations. Its design combines symbolism and reflection. Exhibition halls present photographs, documents, and multimedia installations that tell the human stories behind the tragedy. Families destroyed, lives cut short, and community forever affected. Almond trees planted in the courtyard bloom at the end of winter, symbolizing remembrance, hope, and a continuing call for justice. Beyond the memorial, Khojaly and surrounding areas show visible signs of revival. Homes are being restored, schools and community facilities rebuilt, roads and utilities upgraded, and families are returning to reclaim their ancestral lands. Public spaces and natural areas are also being revitalized, reflecting not only reconstruction, but the gradual return of everyday life. In Khojaly, the memorial preserves the memory of the past, while the returning residents and restored neighborhoods stand as living proof of resilience and renewal. From Khojaly, this is Gulchin Khojalieva with Zohrab Shirinov for A News.
The 13th session of the World Urban Forum that will take place in Baku in May will serve as a moment of review. What progress has been made, where gaps remain, and how the next decade of implementation should be shaped. The year 2026 also marks 10 years since governments adopted the new urban agenda in Quito in 2016, a global commitment to sustainable urbanisation.
Ensuring the maximum level of efficiency in terms of preparation for this.
Housing the world, safe and resilient cities and communities. This slogan reflects one of the most urgent global challenges today: how to provide adequate, affordable and climate-resilient housing for a rapidly growing urban population. Nearly 3 billion people worldwide are estimated to lack access to safe, adequate housing. Cities are expanding, climate risks are increasing, and inequality continues to shape urban development. Against this backdrop, World Urban Forum 13, which will be hosted in Baku in May 2026, aims to place housing at the center of the global urban agenda. Organizers and UN Habitat representatives outlined how Azerbaijan is preparing to host this major global platform, which will bring together governments, urban planners, international organizations and civil society to discuss practical solutions for safer and more resilient cities.
This year, at the United Nations and globally, we would also be looking at progress with implementing Sustainable Development Goal 11. Sustainable Development Goal 11 is a commitment by the world to promote sustainable cities, sustainable communities for a better urban living and better urban future. And we will be reviewing progress. So the World Urban Forum is very significant for that as well. Finally, for us at UN Habitat, the World Urban Forum will be a very important vehicle to set the tone and to inform the implementation of our next 4 years. At UN Habitat, for the next 4 years, we have a new strategic plan. We'll be focusing on housing, collaborating with all relevant actors and stakeholders to promote adequate housing for everyone, everywhere.
Today, urbanisation is accelerating rapidly. According to international forecasts, by 2050, nearly 70% of the world's population will be living in urban areas. While urbanisation creates broad opportunities for economic development, improved quality of life and new prospects, it also generates serious social, environmental and infrastructure challenges for cities. Addressing these challenges requires complex and long-term approaches. For this reason, ensuring people's well-being, social justice and decent living conditions has become one of the central issues of the global urban agenda. At the same time, the implementation of new urban planning models in the liberated territories and the application of modern urbanism approaches provide an important platform to present Azerbaijan's experience in this field to the international community.
Preparations are already underway. Organisers introduced the Baku's digital platform, described as a digital gateway to WUF 13 Azerbaijan, designed to provide information on participation, tourism, media resources and sustainability features. Forum is expected to bring together governments, subnational authorities, urban planners, private sector actors, civil society and academia, creating a rare space for structured dialogue between public and non-government stakeholders. World Urban Forum 13 aims to shift the conversation from awareness to action. The central message is that housing is not only about shelter, it is about stability, opportunity, resilience.
The jailed leader of the PKK has renewed his call for the group to end its armed campaign against the Turkish state. In a statement read publicly on the anniversary of his previous disarmament appeal, Abdullah Öcalan reiterated support for a political transition while urging legislative steps from Ankara. Our correspondent Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, issued a statement on Friday in which he repeated calls for the group to end its decades-long armed insurgency against the Turkish state. The message was read aloud by representatives of Turkey's pro-Kurdish Dem Party. In the statement, Öcalan said the PKK was ready to move from what he described as the politics of violence toward democratic politics and integration. But he also called on Ankara to pass legislation aimed at ensuring what he described as a transition to democratic integration in Turkey. The statement coincided with the first anniversary of Öcalan's earlier appeal for the PKK to disband and lay down its arms. Turkish authorities have responded to that call by pledging legislative reforms designed to expand Kurdish political participation and address long-standing grievances. Last week, Turkey's parliament adopted a legal framework intended to guide the ongoing peace process and the reintegration of former PKK militants into society. The framework called for democratic reforms to proceed in parallel with reciprocal steps by the PKK to disband and surrender its weapons. In Friday's message, Öcalan also stressed the need for what he described as a legal framework encompassing political, social, economic, and cultural dimensions. Despite the ongoing peace process, the PKK is still viewed as a terrorist group by Turkey, the European Union, and Washington. For decades, the group waged a violent insurgency against Turkey, in which tens of thousands of people, both civilians and military personnel, were killed. This is Adam Mara for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Kazakhstan and Serbia have taken another step toward closer cooperation during the official visit of the Serbian president to Astana. The presidents of the two countries adopted a joint statement outlining plans to strengthen partnership in key areas, including digitalization, healthcare, science, investment and culture. 10 bilateral agreements were signed at the Akorda presidential residence. Our correspondent has more from Almaty.
Presidents of Kazakhstan and Serbia have agreed to move toward a closer strategic partnership. Talks between Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and Alexander Vučić took place in Astana during the Serbian president's official visit. The visit began with a formal welcome ceremony at the Akorda presidential residence, followed by closed-door talks. This marks the fifth visit by a Serbian president to Kazakhstan overall, reflecting the continuity of high-level political dialogue between the two countries. Kazakhstan and Serbia have maintained diplomatic relations for 3 decades, and Serbia remains one of Kazakhstan's key partners in the Balkans. Economic ties continue to grow. Trade turnover exceeded $107 million last year, increasing by nearly 8%. Discussions focused on practical cooperation. Serbia retains expertise in the production and modernization of military equipment, armored vehicles and ammunition. And this is of interest to Kazakhstan, where much of the existing equipment requires modernization. At the same time, agriculture remains a central pillar of bilateral trade. The potential for Kazakh exports to Serbia is estimated at $250 million and will depend on business engagement and the terms of a free trade agreement. Astana also hosted the first Kazakhstan-Serbia Business Council. Around 10 memorandums were signed covering IT cooperation, food production and agriculture. Kazakhstan presented itself as a Eurasian transit hub, while Serbia positioned itself as a logistical gateway to Europe. And officials also showcased the National Digital Investment Platform, featuring more than 1,600 projects valued at over $120 billion. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
After the break, we'll assess what President Vučić's visit to Astana signals for Serbia-Kazakhstan cooperation and broader regional alignments. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has arrived in Astana for an official visit aimed at strengthening political and economic cooperation between Serbia and Kazakhstan. The visit highlights growing engagement between Southeast Europe and Central Asia as both countries pursue diversified partnerships amid shifting geopolitical currents. Let's bring in our guest, Nikola Mikovic. He's a political analyst joining us from Belgrade, Serbia. Welcome to the program, Nikola.
Thank you, Dilek. Being on A News is always a pleasure.
Now, let's start with the strategic angle. Why does this Serbia-Kazakhstan engagement matter now?
It matters because Serbia aims to diversify its energy imports. As we know, the country was heavily dependent on Russian energy and now is trying to find alternative sources. According to reports, Kazakhstan last year became the first Serbia's supplier of oil. In the past, it was Iraq. And Belgrade also aims to strengthen economic cooperation with Astana. At this point, Kazakhstan is Serbia's major trade partner and major political as well in Central Asia, while for Kazakhstan, Serbia could serve as a gateway to Europe, especially given that the two have free trade agreements signed, because Kazakhstan is a member of the Eurasian Economic Union and Serbia signed a free trade agreement with that organization a long time ago. Unfortunately, Belgrade is not using that agreement to a significant extent because Serbian economy is not in a position to produce everything that Kazakhstan needs. So as a result, Belgrade has a huge deficit in trade with Kazakhstan, but that's mainly due to oil supplies from Astana to Serbia. Strategically, this is important for both countries, but I think at this point it is Serbia that needs Kazakhstan more than Kazakhstan needs Serbia, as we see Belgrade aimed to improve and to strengthen military ties with Astana. So I think it will be beneficial more for Kazakhstan because it is Kazakhstan that will supply Serbia with certain weapons. Although in the long term, of course, it can be mutually beneficial cooperation. But again, it will depend on Serbian capabilities and the state of its economy in the coming years.
And Nikola, Serbia positions itself as a military neutral but strategically flexible. How does that complement Kazakhstan's multi-vector foreign policy?
Well, unlike Kazakhstan that pursues a true multi-vector foreign policy, Serbia is trying to create an illusion that it's a neutral country and that it is in a position to have that kind of policy to balance between major foreign powers. In reality, that's not the case. Serbia is semi-surrounded by EU members and also surrounded by NATO countries and countries that host NATO troops. As such, it cannot be neutral. It is heavily involved in Ukraine war because it supplies Ukraine with ammunition, and it holds drills with NATO countries, but not with Russia, not with any other countries members of the Russian-led security cooperation organization. Kazakhstan, on the other hand, is in a much better position. I think that's what Vučić emphasized. He always, when he meets with leaders of other countries, he always says how Serbia can learn a lot from them. I don't think that's what he said this time. He said that Kazakhstan implements a lot of good things when it comes to education, for instance, and he also pointed out that Serbia implements many of those things. And I agree with him. He is right, because Kazakhstan is in a much better geopolitical position because there's an ongoing competition between various foreign powers in Central Asia. Whereas that's not the case in the Balkans, where the EU is the major foreign power operating in the region. And Serbia is firmly in the EU's sphere of influence, while Kazakhstan has more rooms to maneuver, which is why Astana is developing close ties with Beijing and with the West, and also is trying to maintain relatively good relations with Russia.
Now, on that, both countries maintain pragmatic relations with Russia while engaging the EU and others. Does that shared balancing act bring them closer?
that's something they have in common. Although, as I said, Kazakhstan is here in a much better position because it is allowed to develop closer ties with all actors, which is not the case in Serbia, although there are Chinese companies operating in the country. But again, that's possible only because the EU is still not pressuring Belgrade to break ties with China. I think that will happen in the future, especially if relations between Beijing and Brussels go from bad to worse. But right now, Serbia is using that situation to develop closer ties with Kazakhstan. And I think the EU is not against that. I think the European Union supports that policy in Belgrade because that puts Serbia further away from Russia, despite the fact that Kazakhstan is Russia's nominal ally. So from that perspective, this visit is very important for Brussels because Brussels is pushing other actors who were in the past who had close ties with Russia to find alternative partners and to develop stronger ties with each other. We see that's happening in Central Asia over the past few years. As I said, I think the European Union will support Belgrade seeking to strengthen economic and political and even military ties with Kazakhstan because it poses no threat to Brussels in any case whatsoever.
And how significant is Central Asia becoming for Balkan states looking to diversify partnerships?
Unfortunately, geography here plays a very important role, which is why economic cooperation cannot be as high as it should be. But that does not prevent Serbia and Kazakhstan to at least try to develop closer economic ties. I think they will manage to do that in the future. What I regret is that Serbia is not developing closer ties with other Central Asian nations as well. That could change, hopefully. But as I said, geography here plays a very important role. But on the other hand, the two countries have very good political relations. Kazakhstan supports Serbian territorial integrity, and Serbia always supported Kazakhstan in the international arena, which gives two countries rooms to try to deepen their relations, both political and economic, and as we see, even military. In the field of military cooperation. I would also like to say that this visit is also very important for Vučić himself because it allows him to portray himself in the eyes of his voters as someone who is balancing his foreign policy and trying to develop closer ties with countries that are not part of the West, because as I said, Serbia is heavily dependent on the European Union and other Western powers. So for him, this is very important. And for the country itself, it could have a positive impact in terms of economy in the future, but not in the short term, I'm afraid.
Nicola, thanks for joining us on the program today, and many thanks for your analysis and insight.
Thank you.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.